Um, so I'm now introducing to you Jorge Sanchez Perez from the University of Alberta, and he's going to talk to us about Mestizaje as a political project and the limits of Latin American philosophy.
Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you, everybody, for your previous presentations. I actually have learned a lot. Extremely nice to be here, and I'm super happy to have met many of you. Some of you I have read a lot before, and now I met you in person, so I got to find out in your faces. And let me just start by mentioning that I am a professor at the University of Alberta, where on May 11, the president of the university released militarized police to remove peacefully gathered students and faculty who were protesting against genocide. And that is unacceptable. No administration should feel entitled to remove students and faculty from anywhere, especially when the object of the protest, which was clearly a protest, was to complain about a genocide that is so bad that for the first time ever, international courts of law are holding Western allies accountable. That is how bad things are. Now, that being said, it's a conference on decolonization, so we have to mention these things. That's my thought. And when you have your Palestinian, Jewish, and multicultural indigenous students from different parts of the world being beaten up, you cannot be quiet. Especially because I have faculty colleagues, Jewish faculty college, who were brutalized by the police. I do not see how that prevents anti-Semitism. So that is not a good excuse. And that being out of the way, let's remind ourselves that there's an ongoing genocide against Palestinians and try to eventually take all these things to praxis if we can. Okay, so these are the two guiding questions that were bothering me. And my philosophical projects start because things bother me. And these are the two questions that I couldn't get out of my head when I was reading Latin American philosophy, in English usually. Who is the mestizo we're theorizing about, and where is this mestizo from? Those were questions that I couldn't get rid of, at least not easily. Let me give you a structure of the talk. I'm gonna give you the introduction / background, and then I'm gonna talk about a normative view of the mestizo, and then a descriptive one. And I'm gonna compare them. And then I'm gonna give you some final remarks. And there's, points in between, but I'll get them. I have to warn you that this is a book project that, it's a draft still, but it's a book project. This is chapter 3 of this book project. And the book project is called Indigeneity and the Mestizo Question, Limits of Latin American Philosophy. So I'm just focusing on chapter 3, which I just finished drafting. And it's like 10,000 words, but I'm comprising in 25 minutes. So I apologize beforehand for all the omissions. But when you write something and you really like yourself, it's hard to eliminate everything and just reduce it, but here we are. I'm doing my best. Now, let me give you more of this background. Why am I interested in this? And just like Linda Martial, Professor Alkov said, I don't know, Linda says, I have a personal interest in this, right? I am a person that could be called mestizo. But this is not an easy question to understand from the beginning, because what does that mean is not always clear. I never knew I was Peruvian until I traveled as a child to Ecuador. I never knew I was Latino until I traveled as a young adult to the United States. I never knew that I was a generic brown other until I traveled for the first time as an adult to the UK. And I never knew I could be white until I traveled to Ghana. So what the hell does it mean to be mestizo when I was told I was mestizo, but really my positionality in the world, thankfully because I've traveled enough, has taught me that this is extremely movable as a target. So I'm personally invested in this. And particularly because my daughter, who was born in Canada, she's Peruvian Canadian, is also part Arab. So if somebody asks me what's the race of my daughter, when I am part indigenous, part black, part white, I don't know what to say. And definitely mestizo doesn't come to mind right away. So I'm still in this extremely complex space. And as a good philosophical talk, I don't have the answers, but I have a lot of questions. Okay, so I'm following sociologists from Mexican origin to identify two ways in which we can talk about mestizo or mestizaje. As a process, first as a discourse, and second as a political process. And I put the philosophical notions of mestizaje in the first camp, discourses. And I put the political projects or the praxis of mestizaje in Latin America as political projects. As the definition says, with varying degrees of institutionalization. So the normative part of my discussion is going to focus on the discourses and the descriptive part on the political projects. Now, usually, we are in the books that I've been reading, we tend to conceptualize the mestizo from the perspective of the subject that is a resident in the global north, the mestizo that lives in the global north, or that is highly connected to it, first, second generation, etc., and their experiences in that relationship. Now, I grew up as an adult in Latin America, in Peru, one of the most indigenous countries in the Americas, right? So I think that there are meaningful differences to at least point out, because there's a danger of me talking about the part over the whole. And in the normative part, I'm going to give you three views of mestizaje from three authors that for me are key: Vasconcelos, Ansaldúa, and Alcoff. First, because their philosophical work cannot be denied, and second, because they just made me feel real. Let me be honest, I was trained in analytical philosophy, right? One of the most detached ways of thinking about philosophy. So to see discussions about mestizaje, identity issues, complexity, in a contextualized sense, made me feel like I could actually belong in this field. So I just love the three, even though I disagree hard with them. The personal value for me is undisputable. So let me start with Vasconcelos. Now, usually when people talk about mestizaje in Vasconcelos, they focus on the cosmic race. I propose that if we're going to read that, we should be reading Ulises Criollo first, because that gives us the context to understand where the cosmic race comes from. In Ulises Criollo, Ulysses is the Latinization of Odysseus. Right? He gives us his autobiography. And he starts from an early age. He starts telling us about how he went from Piedras Negras, the small town in Mexico, to Eagle Pass to go to school, how he had to fight white kids to be deemed as valuable, how he had to reassert that Mexicans were not lazy by nature, how he had to always put himself out there against white people. And the book is fascinating. It's 400 pages long, and it's kind of like egotistic, but I found it to be super interesting as a reading, because at every step of Vasconcelos' life, the United States was there. The white race was there. He was part of political plots, he was part of conspiracies, and he hated negotiating with some US ambassadors, which is written in his autobiography. He called them basically idiots, pretentious idiots. He's like, these white people telling me what to do and controlling the future of Mexico. He got mad about it. But at the end of the day, the racial odyssey that is this Ulises Criollo, his autobiography, or at least that is contained in this book, I think that can only be properly understood if we consider that the Poseidon of the story, the one that makes things hard for him, is the white race, especially the white race in the United States. So the mestizo, in other words, ought to be conceptualized as a racial and cultural response to whiteness. Now, the second author I'm considering is Ansaldúa. And instead of focusing on different books to get her personal experience from the text, I can just look at the Borderlands, La Frontera, the new Mestiza. Because what Vasconcelos did in 2 books, Ansaldúa does in 1. There's no separation between her life experiences and the theorization taking place. Now, again, the connections between Vasconcelos and Ansaldúa are present as a continuing project of thinking about identity. As a queer Chicana, Ansaldúa experienced the United States of America as an insider who was, in many times, treated as an outsider, I think. In a sense, the oppositions and tensions that Vasconcelos felt when he traveled to the United States were Ansaldúa's birthright. She was born into those tensions. She wasn't moved onto them like Vasconcelos did. But still, those tensions are there. Tensions in the United States against the gringo, who, locked into the fiction of white superiority, seized complete political power, stripping Indians and Mexicans of their land while their feet were still rooted in it. So I'm not making this up. The gringo, I hope everybody here knows what the gringo is. I'm gonna throw that out, and I assume that gringo. Somebody was like, that's hate speech. I was like, shut up, gringo. Twitter can get wild, but anyway. Now, a core element of this normative, what I call a normative project, and why am I calling these normative projects? Because they are telling us how to conceive, how to conceptualize the mestizo. That's what I mean by normative. A core element of the normative project of Ansaldúa, I think, is simple survival. The mestizo is a way, the mestiza conceptualization is a way of keeping yourself alive, and attempt to prevent, contain, and with some luck, reverse some of the damage inflicted by white culture and its racist commitments. Now, of course, we can draw more connections between Ansaldúa and Vasconcelos. If we remember, there's this note of in Ansaldúa, this small poem, statement, dart, I don't know how to call it, where she transmutes Vasconcelos, por mi raza hablará el espíritu. Por la raza de la mujer hablará el espíritu. So she incorporates herself in that narrative. But Vasconcelos, when he talks por mi raza hablará el espíritu, I'm going to be quite honest. I think that he actually means his own race, like the race that he is, not the race that he belongs to. But that's part of the larger conversation. So the Ansaldúa sees herself, I think, in a good connection with these disputes of identity. I don't think that that's been disputed in the literature, and she's quite open about it. She, of course, doesn't have the same kind of optimism as the spirit will fix the mestizo identity as a necessary step of history, as Vasconcelos says. She's like, no, we need to tame these negative feelings of the macho in the Latino culture. We have to fix the mestizaje in a way that allows us to overcome these feelings of inferiority that have been developed, et cetera, et cetera. So she's even more normative. She's not like Vasconcelos, who's like, we should conceptualize mestizaje like this, and also the spirit will do the rest. I don't know Hegel. I don't know if I buy that, but okay. Ansaldúa is like, no, we have to do some more work. We have to fix our own consciousness. We have to go towards this new mythos. And that is going to take work. You have to deconstruct many of the things. You have to separate what is the Anglo from what is the Spanish, what is the indigenous. So there's more work involved, I think, in Ansaldúa's normative project than the one that you're going to find in Vasconcelos. But still, a connection is there. Now let me move on to Linda, and briefly talk about two pieces that I think show us a really interesting move. First, the mestizo identity, which is a collaboration she had in American Mixed Race, the Culture of Microdiversity from 1995. And second, I think is the last section in Visible Identities on Being Mixed, which basically is a reshaping of this view. I hope that's a good way of phrasing it. It's weird when you talk and the author is there, right? And there's a very interesting move from one and the other, because the first one starts acknowledging that the mestizo discussion that she's framing, or she's posing, it's framed within North American discourses, within a particular set of realities. A contextual limit is established. Now, that nuanced approach is not necessarily on being mixed, but it is on the introduction of the book, Visible Identities, page 10, if you want to look for it, where 2006, the first stage. And then still, unlike the previous projects of Mestizaje that tend to be either Pan-American or more global, because Ansaldúa is also saying, oh, we have to basically build a coalition of the immigrants, the workers, the Chicanos, and all these people. She's aiming large, her aim seems to be bigger. Vasconcelos, no doubt about it. Alcoff is giving us a more reduced notion, a more contextualized view of the mestizo, which I appreciate a lot. Now, of course, I'm skipping a lot because 25 minutes. I don't know how I'm doing with them.
You still have 9 minutes.
9 minutes. Okay. Okay, so this is a way of formulating this. A possible way to reformulate the problem that Alcoff considers needs to be addressed could be the following. Given a social context such as the one of the United States of America, where racial purity is deemed as the standard against which identities ought to be shaped, how can the mestizo identity be conceptualized in a positive way? That's my way of reading it. I hope Linda doesn't get offended. Take offense, I don't know. Now, here we have to, an individual who has experience being a mestizo in the United States can make sense of their mestizo identity relying on their own subjectivity and horizon of meaning. Right? Well, Garcia has an analysis of this in 2007. Okay, moving to the comparative part. Authors such as Vasconcelos are trying to find true Latin American identity. And they're trying to find it as a space of backlighting and alterity in the face of a them, which is no other than the white race. I'm following Colombian philosopher Santiago Castro Gomez. I think this book just recently came as a translation in English. It's a critique of Latin American reason. I think it was recently translated to English from Spanish. Now, what we have in the three previous authors are giving you is a positive account of Mestizaje. They're telling us how to conceptualize Mestizaje in this positive light. And they're also common in the sense that they are all talking about the mestizo with the US white supremacy perspective. That's the backdrop. And that is perfectly fine. So we have now a way of opposing white supremacy in that setup. Now, let me go to the mestizo as mejorando la raza from a Latin American perspective. I hope that, I don't know if some of you have heard the term mejorando la raza. It's a disgusting piece of crap. It's what you get from family, society, and many people that tell you, marry white, make whiter children, improve your race. That's one of the most common things you're gonna hear in many parts of Latin America. And there's no sense of that being a racist comment because at the end of the day, we all have to aim to be mestizo. Now, if we look at the 16th century caste system of concept of mestizaje, it's a concept that is part of a larger variety of positions. We have mestizo, cabrizo, mulatto, lobo, saltapatras. Saltapatras means back jumping, and means when you marry somebody that is darker. So there were many categories, and the mestizo became a way of absorbing all of them. There are museums in Peru and Mexico that have these paintings with all the different castes and what they meant and the combinations. You can Google them. Sorry, I don't have them. Whenever I see that, I get mad. So I was like, but in the 19th and 20th century, mestizo became more of a fixed thing in Latin America. And became a fixed thing because it's connected to a political project. And I completely apologize for this, but I really want to read this.
6 minutes.
Good. I have to read this because it shows the political project that I'm talking about. This is from Mario Vargas Llosa, Peruvian Nobel Prize winner. It was published in Harper's Magazine in 1992. It is a fact that in many of our countries, as in Peru, it's talking about Latin America, we share in spite of the pious and hypocritical indigenous rhetoric of our men of letters and our politicians, the mentality of the conquistadores. Only in countries where the native population was small or non-existent, or where the aboriginals were practically liquidated, can we talk of integrated societies. In the others, discrete, sometimes unconscious, but very effective apartheid prevails. Important as integration is, the obstacle to achieving it lies in the huge economic gap between the two communities. Indian peasants live in such a primitive way that communication is practically impossible. It is only when they move to the cities that they have the opportunity to mingle with the other Peru. The price they must pay for integration is high. Renunciation of their culture, their language, their beliefs, their traditions and customs, and the adoption of the culture of their ancient masters. After one generation, they become mestizos. They are no longer Indians. Vargas Llosa summarized the goal of many elites in Latin America to be able to claim we are all mestizos, therefore indigenous people, Black people, Asian people, shut up. In Latin America, you have this way of saying we're all mestizos, but some people are more mestizos than others. And the people saying that are usually white and have blue eyes. Now, if you say, well, that was 1992, that can't be the view nowadays. This is from 2022, when indigenous president Pedro Castillo, who gave the most stupid coup ever, and we can talk about that another time, and he's now in jail. He was an indigenous leader, and his son is named Arnold. And this is now a member of Congress by Fujimori's right-wing party, saying in one of the most prestigious news outlets in Peru, in live TV, indigenous people do not want to marginalize themselves. They do not want to say, I am Indian. No, what they want is integration. And that is a good thing. That's why they name their kids with Western names, because we're all mestizos at the end. So what I'm trying to point out here is that we have meaningful tensions in this positive account that we find in many Latin American key works and how mestizaje plays out in political discourses in Latin America. Now, what I'm saying is not news to sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists who are working on this or been working on the problems of the mestizo. Particularly, I have a lot of Afro-Peruvians, Black Peruvians, who detest the concept of mestizaje because it serves to invisibilize Black populations. And this is even more so in Mexico, where politicians say there are no Black people in Mexico because we're all mestizos. So mestizaje in practice becomes this force to eliminate things. So unlike our philosophical discussions, the normative accounts, where mestizaje is a positive thing against white supremacy, in the political practices in Latin America, mestizaje is a tool of white supremacy. And that tension, I think, needs to be accounted for. The focus on the diasporic experience has reduced our chances of noticing that, perhaps. Mestizaje in Latin America as a tool of white supremacy needs to be accounted for. I'm not saying that the diasporic experience, the experience of the Latino in the United States, is not valid. By far, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that me, as growing up as a mestizo in Latin America, have experienced a different thing. Thank you. Gracias.